horror, terror, monsters, makeup. But enough about us. I'm going to talk about the birth of horror as we know it, which I know that word's going to give us a lot of trouble as the night goes on.
Yes, it is.
Let's just swap it out for something that's a little easier to say. Prostitute movies.
Yeah, ladies of the evening.
Painted lady movies.
My
Jasmine-scented movies.
I love to watch them when fall comes around with a candle.
Prostitutes?
Under my blankets, I like to watch them.
Is there any other place for them?
Mm-hmm. What?
Fear wasn't invented in LA, but what we now view as the film genre of horror and most everything we associate with Halloween was created and groomed and crystallized here. So what's the first thing that you think of when you think of Halloween?
Pumpkins.
Oh, God.
Vampires. A Nosferatu?
Keep going. Just keep going.
A Frankenstein.
Thank you.
A Frankenstein's the first thing I thought of, but I was scared to say it.
After you think of pumpkins, Nosferatu, and vampires, you think of a Frankenstein.
The doctor, right?
So you think of the good doctor. So that and all the other monsters, as we know and see them now, and just American horror in general, they were born in the Valley at Universal Studios. Mm-hmm. So, as I asked before, why Universal? And even deeper, why was Universal even in LA? Why did movies come to LA? As usual, it's time to start at the very beginning. We got to get to the root of this.
1512, dawn on a lone tree in a sleepy Pueblo town. Frankenstein was walking down Cahuenga Pass.
Christopher Columbus lands at Plymouth Rock, and he's greeted by the Wolfman? The idea of a scary movie didn't start in LA. The first scary movie that you can consider being made was in 1895 by the Lumiere brothers called The Joyous Skeleton. Mm. It's scary if you find a 45-second clip of a dancing skeleton scary. I do. What is widely considered to be the first scary movie, though, is Manor of the Devil, made in 1896 by Georges Méliès. Mm-hmm. It's about like a magician or something, luring a lady into his castle and turning into a bat, and all sorts of things happen.
Who's in it, Vincent Price?
Yeah, it's starring Tom Cruise. And I guess that sort of thing was scary back then. So was a train leaving a station coming at you. So
only because it was ahead of schedule.
It was unheard of back then. But of course, there was only one place where scary movies could really start to take shape: Germany, naturally. Great leaps in the horror movie genre, they usually happen in times of great turmoil and uncertainty, as we'll soon see happened in LA with Universal. And what was going on in Germany after World War I definitely fit that bill. Mm-hmm. What was once a country full of sausage-guzzling, fiercely proud Germans became a babysat country full of confused and traumatized and defeated people after World War I. So even worse, the sanctions that they imposed on Germany after the war, they were brutal and life wasn't easy for people. Okay. So what grew out of this were the expressionist movies like The Golem, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari in 1920, and those were the starting points of all horror movies. Then in 1922, Nosferatu happened and planted some ideas in the minds of some movie makers over in America.
Those three were German? The Golem was German?
Golem was German.
I didn't know
that. He was Jewish, but German. Nosferatu, the movie, by the way, it was not authorized by the Bram Stoker family, which is why it's not called Dracula. And they hated it. The Stokers hated it.
Why? Max Schreck does the eye thing.
And they tried to have all the copies of it destroyed, but luckily a few were saved, but 30 minutes of the original have been lost forever. So let's go back a few years from that happening.
We're going back a few years.
Look, it's kind of like Lost. This is going to be our first experimental time-jumping episode. So fade in. The Los Angeles Public Library. So we'll go back a few years over to the motion picture capital of the world. That's right, Fort Lee, New Jersey. So LA wasn't even a sparkle in the eye of the sleaziest movie producer at that point. In 1906, a German Jew from Germany named Carl Laemmle.
You just love saying
Germany.
He
opened up a movie theater in Chicago, and things went well for him. So not long after that, he started a film rental service where he would rent out new movies to other theaters to show as well. By 1909, he figured, why rely on other people's product? So he opened up his very own movie production company, the Independent Motion Picture Company, aka IMP.
Okay.
Laemmle had all of his movies filmed in Fort Lee at what he called the Universal Movie Studio, which was the biggest movie studio in the world at that point. Their first movie was a short called Hiawatha.
Like the little boy with the butt. The little Indian boy with the butt. The little butt boy.
So their first feature was called Traffic in Souls. It was about a prostitute, which is telling from a painted lady.
Horror.
It's telling from the very start where Universal was ultimately headed. So not long after Laemmle set up shop, Fox Film came and made their own studio there, then Goldwyn Pictures.
They only made movies about foxes, though.
Yeah. So then Goldwyn Pictures came, then Biograph came, then Metro and Solax. I try to guess which ones of those aren't still around. Fort Lee was an ideal location because it was so close to New York City where all the workers lived and where the main offices were, and then they were in this open space to film. They had these steep cliffs nearby that was very photogenic.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, also nearby was an evil man who had set up shop a while earlier, Thomas Edison, who had the Motion Picture Patents Company. What Edison did was he bought up all the patents for all the mechanisms on all the machinery that was required to make movies, and then would sue other companies for making movies, or as he saw it, profiting off of his patents without permission.
He's like the Monopoly man.
He's Mr. Burns.
He's Mr. Burns. He tried to block the sun.
He owned the patent on solar flares.
What is that, a bright light in the sky? Who owns it? I want it.
I do now. In 1912, Edison's trust forced Laemmle out of his distributing interests, so Laemmle combined with a bunch of the other independent film studios and formed the Universal Film Manufacturing Company. Supposedly, he got the name because he looked out of his window and saw a plumbing truck called Universal Plumbing, so that was it.
Wow.
Yeah, fun. So Laemmle being the...
It wasn't that he owned the universe?
Actually, Edison had the patent on the universe. So being the mogul that he was, he soon asserted his dominance, all of these disparate studios that were there in this thing. So he consolidated them, and now he was the supreme leader. Wow. But the problem remained that Edison was being a real wet blanket about all of this. So they needed to get far away from New Jersey,
so
as everybody should. Yeah, so they hired the Godfather.
Mozzarella Bufala.
Mozzarella de Bufala. Some studios had tried out Florida, but they found that the weather was too unpredictable and there were Cubans everywhere. But it was too long. It wasn't long. It wasn't long until they found the promised land of L.A., So the first movie company to come to LA, as far as I could tell, was the Biograph Film Company in 1907. They brought with them Mary Pickford, who would later go on to become a noted chili burger fiend.
She's more of a ghoul, really, when it came to cheeseburgers.
In 1910, Laemmle opened up his Imp studio at Sunset and Gower opposite the already existent Christy Nestor studio, while still having most of his productions taking place in Fort Lee back in New Jersey. And then after the Edison shakeup in 1912, Laemmle started to focus his attention more on LA, and in March 1914 he bought a 230-acre plot of land in the valley called Nestor Ranch for $165,000.
That's the most goats I've ever seen in one transaction.
They were more. Some of them were lambs.
Lambs was the change.
So a year later, on March 15th, 1915, this land was officially opened for business under its new name, Universal City. But this wasn't just a movie studio. It wasn't just the biggest movie studio in the entire world either, which it now was. It was its own unincorporated territory. It was the first entirely self-contained municipality that was dedicated purely to the making of movies. It had its own fire department, had its own hospital.
It had a hospital.
Everybody got suckers. It even had its own zip code, which is 91608. So remember that. But save that in your phones.
We'll do its own episode on the zip code of that.
It'll be called Universal City 91608.
Even Frankenstein came by with a motorcycle and took Shelley.
You guys, I think the Invisible Man might have a drug problem. So even from the start, it was a tourist attraction at Universal Studios. Visitors could come and they could pay to visit. Opening day saw thousands of people that came to watch as they filmed some Western movies. From the very beginning, there were tours you could take of the different movie sets, and the tours, they stopped in the 1920s when sound came along, it was too loud, and then they restarted again in 1964, and they've been going ever since. Okay. That's the tram tour, Shark, Jaws, Jark. That's what that movie, I've been saying it for years, that's what that movie should have been
Krang
called.
Klong, the gorilla.
And Blyco. Universal City wasn't just significant for pushing LA towards the intense focus that it now has on making movies. It also introduced the idea of basically turning a movie studio into a factory of movie making. But back in 1912, Fort Lee was the movie capital, with only 15 studios, meantime, were working in Hollywood. By 1915, 60% of all U.S. film was being done in L.A. So why L.A.?
Is that in the 8 pages you have right here?
I was hoping you could answer that. So like I said, Edison was making things really difficult for people to make movies, so the studios wanted to move as far away from him as possible so that he couldn't catch them violating his patents.
Right.
And in LA, even if he did decide to come and get them, they would have so much warning that he was coming, so they would have enough time to flee to Mexico.
Oh my God.
Also, labor in LA was very cheap in the entire city. Ask me why.
The people that who resided in the place they were trying to flee to?
No.
Second guess? Italians.
Anybody. What about you, little boy?
Look them up.
Take that abba zabba out of your mouth. The reason why it was cheap in LA is, we talked about this not that long ago, LA was a non-union city, so labor was very cheap. The building hadn't exploded yet.
Is that a figure of speech that I don't know?
No, what are you talking about? I could be dumb too, just like
Nobody can be dumb like me, you know that.
So just as important, LA had perfect film weather. It was almost always sunny in Philadelphia, and it was dry enough to film outside. In other words, drought weather. Mm-hmm. So the sunlight was especially important because film stock back then needed a lot of light to expose properly. There were also a lot of types of landscapes around. There was the city, there were mountains, there was the beach, there was Venice, there were farms, there were ports. Everything was within an hour of each other. We have why they came to LA, but now why did Universal start doing horror movies? Guess this time?
The people who resided in the place they're trying to flee to.
Bingo! So, like I said before, during times of serious financial crisis, there's usually a huge leap forward in the horror genre.
Yes.
And what greater depression was there than the Great Depression? So each studio had their own way of dealing with the depression. Warner Brothers started doing really gritty gangster movies to show how grim the world was and what the prohibition underworld was like. MGM tried to distract you from reality with big budget, star-driven movies. Others, they made musicals, sing the pain away. Others, like the Marx Brothers, Charlie Chaplin, they tried to make you laugh it all off.
Yeah.
Universal's form of escape was through horror.
You'll leave the theater thinking, it's not that bad.
At least I'm not being harvested from my brain. Oh, wait. It came at a perfect time because all that dread and fear that people felt watching these movies, they related to that so easily right outside of the theater. So Universal was considered at the time one of the little three studios, so their budgets weren't very big, which lent itself well to the horror genre, and being one of the smaller studios, Universal wanted to find a way to stand out from the rest. Around this time also, Hitler was taking control of Germany, which put an end to the Expressionism movement back in Germany, and a lot of these filmmakers that were doing horror there came to Hollywood, and they started giving their own ideas to these things. So the first Universal movie considered as the prototype of the horror movie was The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1923, for which they built a life-size replica of Notre Dame Cathedral in the hills above Lancashire.
Really?
Yeah. That's like bigger than most buildings in LA. At that time, certainly bigger than almost all buildings in LA. And it was so that some hunchback could waddle around in it.
They could drive drunk Lon Chaney over there.
That was his son. But the first big step forward in the horror genre was The Phantom of the Opera in 1925, starring the man of 1,000 faces, Lon Chaney Sr., as the Phantom. He was also Quasimodo in The Hunchback. Chaney Sr. was born in 1883 in Colorado.
Oh, boo.
Both of those marijuana smoking legalizers, both of his parents were deaf and mute. So starting from birth, he had to learn how to be really expressive without speaking, which came in handy because that's all you do in silent movie acting. Yeah. So he became a theater actor first, and in 1905 he met his wife Cleva Crichton, who was also a performer in Oklahoma City, and then they soon had a kid who we'll talk about that later. And then they moved to LA to start performing there, and their careers weren't that good. They weren't doing so well, and Cleva was getting a little despondent, And then in 1913, while Chaney was performing at the Majestic Theater, which used to be at 845 Broadway across from the Orpheum, it's now a parking garage, as everything
It's a
is that we
great
talk about.
parking lot.
Beautiful. The acoustics are great in that parking garage. So Cleva, while Chaney was performing, Cleva was standing in the wings, and she decided, I think I'm going to kill myself.
Oh my God.
So she drank a bottle of mercury bichloride, and she survived, but her vocal cords didn't, and she was never able to sing again. Also killed by the poison was their marriage. Chaney later remarried, but his career in the theater, I say that he later remarried. Well, I'm going to bring up, first off, the names of everybody's offspring in this and how many marriages were involved with these people.
We'll keep a tally mark for everybody.
I think we should. So Chaney's career in theater, because of the scandal, was not good. It was not good. So he decided to try his luck in the growing film industry and got hired that same year as an extra, making $3 a day. Chaney eventually got the chance to act in some supporting roles, and people started to notice how talented of an actor he was, and soon he started having starring roles. In all, he ended up acting in 157 movies throughout his career. And the reason he was considered the man of 1,000 faces was because he played such weird and different characters, and he did all of his own makeup and completely transformed himself to inhabit each unique character. So he would spend painful hours applying makeup and prosthetics to himself to make himself unrecognizable in each role. And he was really innovative with what he did. When he had to play a double amputee, he developed a harness that strapped his legs to his back so he could hop around on his knees. Like, it would hurt him to do this stuff. And the guy who wrote Psycho, later on, he described Chaney's face as the face of naked horror, which that's a great way to put it. I mean, naked prostitute. So a joke at the time was that if somebody was going to go to squish a spider, they'd say, "Don't, it might be Lon Chaney." Also, he almost literally wrote the book on movie makeup when he wrote the movie makeup entry in the 1929 Encyclopedia Britannica. He was the first actor to be against the notion that was already setting in among the movie studios that an actor should be cast to look the part. He felt that it's an actor's duty to become the part no matter what you look like or who you are. So he didn't want to be a star by being glamorous and beautiful, which was also what, that's what people were starting to become. He wanted to be a hideous monster. You want to be the grossest thing you could look at. So by the time Phantom of the Opera came out, Chaney was a huge star, but this movie itself was a huge event. They built a giant replica of the Paris Opera House on stage.
Did they not learn how to angles?
Angles didn't exist back then. So they built it on stage 28 of the Universal lot. It was the first steel and concrete stage ever made for a Hollywood movie. Over 5,000 people were on screen in this movie, which is a lot of people, I think.
Did everyone get paid or what?
No, only 3 of them.
You, and you. And that person, Mickey Mouse.
You're going to love this. They used live rats to film it. Mm-hmm. Not just live rats.
Was it hold up the cameras or what?
They weren't union. Anybody could do anything back then. You wanted to have a sound guy? Get a possum. You didn't want to go pay a writer from some sort of guild? You can get a cricket. So not only did they use live rats, there were so many live rats that they needed a rat handler to keep them in line. By the way, I sent in your application to become a rat handler. They really want you.
What year was this?
1925.
Okay. While the rats are being exterminated because of the plague, they're being harbored by Universal Studios. No, come here, it's safe. It's safe here. Come on. You look innocent. Come on, I'll put you to work. You're a good kid.
Death to all rats, unless they got that sparkle.
They're the real horrors.
Yeah. The real painted ladies. So when the movie came out, Universal really hyped up how scary it was going to be. They spread rumors that the film wouldn't be released because Chaney's makeup was too scary. They wouldn't put up pictures of his face for promotion because they said it had been censored. They even said that people were fainting and vomiting during the showings, and they would put ambulances in front of the theater just to freak people out. Chaney was poised for even bigger things since Carl Laemmle Jr., who was Carl Laemmle Sr.'s son. This is the first of a very confusing line of names.
They really couldn't think of a better, Bill.
The hubris.
Thank you.
The hubris of these people. Laemmle Sr.'s son and Jr. started to run Universal around 1928. So Laemmle Jr. wanted to make a Dracula movie which Laemmle Sr. thought was smut and would only allow it to happen if Chaney Sr. were starring in it. So they got Chaney Sr. on loan from MGM because he was working there at that point. And Chaney his idea for the movie was he was going to play both Dracula and Van Helsing in it, which would have been
great.
Unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know. He died of pneumonia 5 weeks before they were set to start filming at age 47. So nowadays, stage 28, which was the Phantom of the Opera stage, it still exists, and part of the set, this is where it gets a little scary, part of the set from Phantom of the Opera still stands inside of it. Isn't that scary?
That is scary.
What do you think, little boy?
He's waking up now.
So it's still there, and it's said that Chaney's ghost is said to be seen running around in a cape or holding a chandelier in there. Like I mentioned, Carl Laemmle Jr., his real name was Julius, but he went by Carl Laemmle Jr.
This looks good on paper.
I am looking at paper right now. It's looking pretty good.
Leave the room. Leave me alone with the paper.
Laemmle Jr. took over the operations of Universal in 1928, like I said, and he started steering Universal heavily into the direction of horror. That year, they made The Man Who Laughs, which is said to be the inspiration for the Joker from Batman?
Batman. Can we say Batman now?
Oh, Birdman. Oh, wait, no, that's a movie. Oh, God, what can we say? Monkey Moose. A Dracula project had been in the works in different forms, including one that would have had Conrad Veidt, who was the guy from Cabinet of Indian in the Cabinet of Cupboard.
He was also in The Man Who Laughs. He was The Man Who Laughs.
Spoiler alert.
Oh, jeez. boy.
Consider it.
I'm just making sure that you're informed, because sometimes it doesn't seem so.
So they wanted him to play Dracula, but after Chaney Sr.'s death, Laemmle Jr., who was 23 at the time. Orange Julius. Oh my God, it's the same guy. It's all connected. So he was 23 and he settled, and in their eyes, I really mean settled, on what ended up being the perfect person to play the part of Dracula, Bela Lugosi. So Lugosi, another tragic story. Lugosi was born Bela Ferenc Dzoblasko in 1882, but he took the name of his hometown Lugos in what was then Austria-Hungary, now Romania, which was near the western border of Transylvania. Perfect. From a young age, he started acting, and by the early 1900s, he was the #1 theater actor in Austria-Hungary. He even played Jesus, which is interesting.
I've seen the picture.
Yeah, it's weird.
It is weird. I mean, they both came back from the dead.
Oh my God. They both involve blood, I think.
You're right. One of them has wine, the other one just needs it to live.
He was a good citizen. He fought
Jesus?
Jesus was a great soldier. He fought in World War I, but once the country started to change, Lugosi was chased out of the country again for being pro-actors union. There's a lot of union stuff going on.
They take it seriously.
People just hated unions. Oh, wait, no, onions. Sorry. So he made his way to the U.S. Lugosi eventually found the role he was born to play in the stage production of Dracula, in which he took part in 256 performances.
Wow.
When he found out that Universal was making a Dracula movie, he knew that he was the only man for the part. Unfortunately, it seemed like Universal wanted anybody else on the planet other than Lugosi.
What was that kid doing? No. What was that lady doing?
He basically had to beg them to let him play the part, and they finally agreed to give him the part, but at a quarter of the salary that they were paying. I don't know why they were so against him. So after Dracula, Universal offered Lugosi the starring role in their next movie, Frankenstein, but Lugosi turned it down because he didn't want his face covered up by makeup because he was just so pretty, and because there were no speaking lines, which for the heavily accented person in movie history, I want more lines. I want more lines in English. So him rejecting Frankenstein turned out to maybe be the worst decision he ever made, because he never managed to recapture anything even close to the success he had in Dracula after this, and he loved the character of Dracula. He wanted to play Dracula in all the sequels, but Universal would not let him. And maybe they might have been bitter that he didn't play Frankenstein. I don't know, but they wouldn't let him. And he ended up being relegated to after being Dracula, these insultingly minor roles in other Universal.
Yeah.
Like he's the gypsy that dies after 2 minutes in the Wolfman. Just these tiny parts. So the only times he actually played Count Dracula in a movie out of all the sequels and crossovers that they did was the original Dracula and an Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. That's it.
And he kills it in that too.
The way he opens that coffin. Never lost a beat. So he even got so desperate that he eventually did agree to play Frankenstein's monster years later in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. So things got even worse when Lugosi became addicted to morphine after an injury around 1935, and then after that he became addicted to methadone and Demerol. He would mask his addiction on set by sipping on burgundy wine all the time.
Like blood.
Oh my God. His communion wine. So he was doing that, but a drug addiction and a failing movie career is a very bad cocktail, and the wheels just started coming off. And while he was still doing okay, Lugosi lived in Beechwood Canyon at 2835 West Shore Drive. But once he started losing money, he moved around to several different places around the city, but most notably in what was referred to as the Dracula House in North Hollywood at 10841 Whipple Street, which was just a 5-unit apartment building.
Wow.
And it was right near Universal, which was kind of sad.
It is sad.
So Lugosi, he had been married, get a load of his marriages. He had been married while he was still in Europe, but I think she died really young. For his second marriage, he married a rich widow from San Francisco in 1925, but that lasted for 3 days.
Wow.
Because he was having some sort of affair with Clara Bow.
Of course he was.
He managed to burn through a third wife, but don't worry, he found a fourth. The saddest part of his story was that the only filmmaker who would have him in his movies towards the end of his life was Ed Wood, who was Ed Wood Jr.
He certainly was.
So this chapter of Lugosi's life is told in the movie Ed Wood. He's played by Martin Landau, for which he won an Oscar in 1994. Lugosi ended up divorcing his fourth wife in 1955, and then he promptly checked himself into rehab for 3 months. When he got out, he was hopeful that he would have a triumphant comeback. He was clean. This is it. Unfortunately, he was relying on Ed Wood to stage his comeback, and when this wasn't clearly working out, he started drinking again. On the plus side, he did find a fifth wife.
Hey, look at him.
So a year after getting out of rehab, Lugosi died of a drug-related heart attack during the filming of Plan 9 from Outer Space, what many consider to be the worst movie of all time.
It's just slow and makes no sense, that's all.
Didn't they used because he died, so they just used footage of him in his rocking chair.
And then they got
his stunt. Yeah, he got someone to
it was a chiropractor or something who Ed Wood thought his brow looked like Bela Lugosi's, and so that's why he's covered up in a cape.
So Lugosi died in his Hollywood home at 5630 Harold Way with a copy of Ed Wood's next script on his lap, Final Curtain, in 1956. He was 21. He was ageless. He was a vampire. Heart attack.
He got married
stake in the heart attack.
Got first married when he was 9.
So he was 71 years old.
Okay.
He was so poor when he died that his old friend Frank Sinatra had to pay for his funeral. And here's another ghost story sort of thing. During his funeral procession, his hearse was being drawn by horses. When they got to Hollywood Boulevard, the horses pulled out of the driver's control, and they rode down Hollywood Boulevard down the same path that Lugosi would take every day to get his newspaper and cigarettes.
Wow.
So his grave now is in Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City. Holy Cross! He was a very vain man, and his hair was dyed black before he was buried, and he was buried in one of his Dracula capes.
Of course he was.
Naturally. I think he even had the medallion on it. Imagine if you opened up his thing and fresh as the day he died.
What day is it?
Oh, crap, I'm late. That's my best Lugosi impression. Oh, crap.
I heard they're making a Dracula TV show.
Has it been cast? Lugosi's only child was a boy named, you guessed it, Bela Lugosi Jr. There's also an official Lugosi family website, which is absurdly bad. It's BelaLugosi.com. Go to it and look at it. You can send emails to the Lugosi family through it. It's ridiculous. It's absurd.
I almost want to pause the episode to do that.
No.
Don't ruin this magic.
Back to the actual movie. Dracula came out in 1931. It was what people consider to be the first official monster movie. This was also the first horror movie to have sound in it, an invention that the horror genre really used to great effect. For whatever Lugosi became later on, he was so perfect for Dracula, especially since they had sound. They could really use his accent, which that voice combined with his look pretty much defined what we now view as the image of evil. That's, you think of an evil person, Dracula. A Hungarian. That's what you think.
Dressed in all black, who lives in a castle by himself. Well, not by himself. He has 3 girls there, too.
He lures little children there, like us.
And an armadillo. There's an armadillo in that movie. people make fun of it.
So Lugosi knew this character so well from the stage show that he insisted on doing his own makeup. He'd even stay in character and costume on set, mumbling to himself, "I am Dracula." Nice to meet you. He took the role really seriously, and when he was later on the set of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, he would get frustrated at Abbott and Costello Constantine for always playing jokes. He would get mad at them. This is serious. So when Dracula first came out, here's what's interesting. Not everybody knew the story like we do today, or even knew what vampires were. As we've established, people back then were stupid. We know that. Everyone knows that. So when they watched the movie, they were finding out for the first time that Count Dracula, he's not just some royal debonair. We can't trust. They were slowly finding out that he's someone to fear, which is something that nobody is ever really, unless you're like 4 watching the movie, you're not going to experience that ever again. And that's because Lugosi's performance was just so like unforgettable. Yeah. And Dracula has since become the most portrayed character in movies of all time. He's been in 272 different movies. Since horror as a genre didn't really exist before Dracula came out, they didn't really know how to market it. So they released it on Friday the 13th, but it was February 13th, and they released it as a Valentine's movie. And they gave it the tagline, "The strangest love story of all."
Between who?
Dracula's teeth and a girl's neck. They just didn't know, how would you mark? What would you say? Like, here's a story about pure evil sucking your blood.
Don't go to sleep tonight.
So despite this weird marketing campaign, the movie sold 50,000 tickets in its first 48 hours. Interesting side note on this, while Dracula was being filmed, at night, a different crew would come in and film a Spanish version of the movie with Mexican actors, and they used all the same sets. And the grandkids of the star of the Mexican version are the people that made American Pie. Isn't that weird?
That's so strange. Is it just Dracula but in Spanish?
Or it's the same movie. It's Dracula, the same sets, everything's the same.
Bela Lugosi speaks Spanish?
He spoke so much. Yo soy Dracula.
Because Dracula is feminine.
Anyway, Dracula was such a huge success that Universal scrambled to put out its next monster movie just 9 months later, Frankenstein. So Frankenstein was also a popular stage play in England, so Universal figured it would be the next logical monster movie to bring to life. They found just the man to bring it to life when a bit actor named Boris Karloff waltzed into the Universal commissary one day wearing what he thought was a really nice suit. He thought he was looking so good, and then the director saw him and knew right then that this was his unholy monster.
His sleeves go up to his elbows. He doesn't fit in that thing.
What's that sticking out of his neck?
Is his shoes made of wood?
Why is his head so flat? Hire that man. So they teamed up with the now legendary makeup artist Jack Pierce to put pounds of prosthetics onto Karloff. It took between 3 and 8 hours to make him even more hideous than he already was. So Pierce went...
handsome young man.
Yeah, handsome. In a horror monster sort of way.
They didn't like each other, by the way.
Look, he's no Bela Lugosi. Really, they didn't. Pierce and
Karloff didn't like each other.
Wow.
They were not like, they didn't fight or anything.
I don't think Pierce, it seemed like nobody liked Pierce because he would spend we could just put like a rubber band on that. No, I got to use human flesh.
He knew how to get paid.
He did.
This is going to take like 6 hours tops.
How perfect that the two people that didn't get along had to spend like literally half the day together every day. Pierce went on to also do the iconic makeup of the Bride of Frankenstein, the Mummy, and the Wolfman. Mm-hmm. So when Karloff was moving on the lot from the makeup department to the filming set, they would put a burlap bag over his head so that people wouldn't see what he looked like before the movie came out. So the movie cost under $300,000 to make. It took in over $5 million. Wow. It was an even bigger hit than Dracula was. It rocketed Karloff to movie stardom that lasted much longer than Lugosi's. His knack for playing like strange and horrifying characters let him. Became listed in credits as Karloff the Uncanny, and eventually he was just Karloff. Just the name, it became like a shorthand for terror. Yeah. So if you saw Karloff, I'm scared. I'm scared right now. His name's all over this paper.
You shouldn't have said it.
Karloff. Karloff was born William Henry Pratt, November 23rd, 1887, in a suburb of London. He became an orphan at a very young age. He always wanted to act, but he would only ever watch plays until he was over 21 years old, and then he moved to Canada and joined an acting troupe. But they were like, what plays are you in? And he listed all these plays that he had only watched, but he said he had been on in all of these. So when the curtain went up on his first show, he was making $30 a week. By the time the curtain came down, he was making $15 a week. So he moved to Hollywood in 1918, but he was still only interested in theater, and he worked as a truck driver around town on the side after switching to movies, and he hit it big in Frankenstein, which he was in his 40s when Frankenstein came out. So Karloff, like I said, he was in a lot of other horror movies, including 8, where his co-star was Bela Lugosi. He only played Frankenstein's monster in 3 movies, the original, Bride of Frankenstein, and Son of Frankenstein. But when they were making Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, he felt like they were making fun of the character, that he really did care about Frankenstein, so he didn't want to take part in that. Lugosi didn't care.
Oh, is he not doing it? Okay, I'm all over that.
I could be all of them. You want me to?
I'll be Abbott, Abbot Costello, whoever.
I'm here to audition for Abbott. Bud. So Karloff was also one of the founding members of the Screen Actors Guild, another union, which was very dangerous to his career in town at the time because it was so anti-union. He was the 9th member ever to join it once it got started. He later went on to have his own horror-based TV show, Thriller, from 1960 to 62. He was also the Grinch and the narrator in How the Grinch Stole Christmas. We talked about that many times, I feel like. He lived in a few places around L.A., in Beverly Hills, West Hollywood, Van Nuys. He even lived in North Hollywood, also next door to W.C. Fields, which is a movie in itself.
Yeah. One of them is watering the lawn, the other one's muttering.
One of them is being chased by angry pitchfork-wielding citizens, and the other one's Frankenstein. One of his last movies, or at least what's probably best that we consider to be his last movie, was Target. In 1968, which addressed his whole horror movie past and why the world eventually rejected people like him. It's a very good movie. It's a very LA movie.
Very Valley movie too.
Very Valley movie. Very horrifying also, in a different kind of monster way.
I'll get to it.
So he has 2 stars on the Walk of Fame, one for movies, one for TV. He's also the only person other than a U.S. president to be on a stamp more than twice. Karloff, as well, was married 5 times. His only child was a daughter who was mercifully not named Boris Jr. He died February 2nd, 1969 in England, and for playing the most monstrous of all the Universal monsters, he seemed to have he was the most well-adjusted and nicest, it seemed, of all of them. Universal followed up in 1932 by introducing their next iconic monster, the Mummy, which was also played by Boris Karloff, which was the studio's way of cashing in on the Egypt mania that was going through the nation after the discovery of King Tut's tomb and the supposed curse that came along with that.
Yeah.
The Mummy was basically seen as a retelling of Dracula, but with a dead Egyptian instead of a Hungarian. But the makeup that went on Karloff for this was really incredible.
Yeah, I love the makeup.
It would take 8 hours to put on, and it was so hard to do that he's only in the full mummy makeup once in the whole movie, and the rest of the movie they just made his face look dusty. But
it still took Jack Pierce half the day to do it. I gotta get a
that's not the right dust.
Yeah, that's not the right dust.
I need dust from King Tut's tomb. But just thinking of Karloff in that mummy makeup with his arms crossed across his chest, what an icon that image is. And after The Mummy came The Invisible Man in 1933, which was supposed to star Karloff, but he was busy, so they used Claude Rains.
He was very good in it.
Very good. Even I didn't. Was he? I haven't seen it.
He does very good voiceover work in that movie.
He wears a prosthetic nose like nobody's business.
And then he throws it at somebody.
After that came The Bride of Frankenstein in 1935, which is considered by most people to be the greatest of all these movies.
Can we talk about The Bride real quick?
What do you want to say?
The actress Elsa Lanchester, who is a really great actress, who you might recognize from that episode of I Love Lucy, where they pick up the hitchhiker and they both think that they're the highway killer. Yeah. She's also I didn't know this, the grandmother in National Lampoon's Vacation, the one that dies or the aunt. It's really? The aunt, yeah, the aunt that dies on the way to Wally World. That's Elsa Lanchester. That's the Bride of Frankenstein. That's so weird. When I sat and thought about it, oh yeah, they have the same eyes. That's right.
Those bird-like movements.
All right, that's all.
So
that's all I wanted to say.
I don't want to talk about the girl movies. Universal had made horror a brand at this point, and that inspired the other studios around town to have their crack at it. MGM made stuff like Freaks. Paramount were making Jekyll and Hyde movies. Not everybody was thrilled with all these horror movies. Yeah. The people that weren't happy about this was the censors that were starting to take hold of Hollywood. The Hays Code was kicking in and was objecting to how gruesome these movies were. And Universal was really, they were making some really edgy stuff before they started cracking down. They were making movies like Murders in the Rue Morgue, which was Lugosi's second movie after Dracula. It had real prostitutes, and there was human experimentation. There was some bestiality sort of stuff.
Freaks is another one of those movies that's like, oh yeah, there should be censors.
Yeah,
please, we need a couple.
They didn't like Universal was showing rats. They didn't like,
I agree with them.
They didn't like women lying on sofas to be on screen. And worse than lying on sofas, Universal was criticized for having women be the victims in these movies, which is something that, like, yeah, women need to die first in horror movies. Like, that's the common thing now. The British Board of Film Classification had their rating system. They had 2 letters. They had U for universal viewing and A for adult viewing. After Frankenstein came out, they had to create a new letter, H for horror, which eventually became the X rating.
You just close those 2 prongs of the H in and you cross them.
Different cities at this time, they could recut the movies however they saw fit to censor it. Yeah. So in Kansas City, they cut Frankenstein so badly that it was half the running length by the time they were done with it. 15 minutes of The Bride of Frankenstein has been lost maybe forever because of censors. What all this meant was that now Universal horror movies kind of dwindled toward the end of the 30s, as the movies, the ones they were putting out weren't as big of hits until they made Son of Frankenstein 1939, which showed that people were starting to show an interest again, and Universal asserted its dominance once again in 1941 with The Wolfman. Mm-hmm. Universal's first werewolf movie had been Werewolf of London in 1935, and that was actually the first like Hollywood, the real werewolf movie Hollywood ever made. The Wolfman was a departure from the previous monsters that Universal had been filming, because by this time the Laemmles were no longer running Universal. So the new executives wanted to create their own original monster by the name of Larry Talbot. So while the 30s had seen monsters based on Gothic literature and mad scientists, the fears of the 40s led to horror taking the form of like animal-human monster hybrids. Yeah. What helped The Wolfman become such a hit was that it came out just a few days before Pearl Harbor happened, which was at a time when men in real life were turning into monsters as well and murdering each other. So Universal wanted Karloff to play the part again, but they ended up with the son of one of Universal's early megastars, Lon Chaney Jr., who was born Crichton Chaney in Oklahoma City on February 10th, 1906 to Cleva and Lon Sr., but he was born 3 months early, and when he came out, he wasn't breathing. So his dad had to run outside and plunged him into the Belle Isle Lake, which shocked him back to life.
Wow.
And then his dad nurtured him in an incubator that he made out of a shoebox with breathing holes punched into it. Always the innovator.
You mean a shoebox?
So he grew up with his famous dad in LA. He went to the Los Feliz Grammar School. He went to Hollywood High, but his dad would not let him become an actor, even though he kind of wanted to. Mm-hmm. He was a tall man. He was 6'3". He was taller than both Lugosi and Karloff.
Was he really? Why does he seem
You know who's the smallest? I know. You know who's the smallest? Karloff was the smallest of all of them.
You're serious?
Isn't that weird?
He's small?
He was like my height.
That's really small. That's so small.
3'4", isn't that? That's not that small.
Help me out of this chair. I might fall down.
Chaney Jr., he ended up working for the General Water Heater Company until his dad died in 1930, and he finally decided to try acting. Unfortunately, things didn't go so well for him, so in 1935, to try to get a leg up, he reluctantly took his dad's name and became Lon Chaney Jr., and it worked. So his career took off. He had a home in the valley above Ventura Boulevard. He went on to become the only person to play all 4 of the big Universal monsters, the Wolfman, Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Mummy. Unfortunately, he developed a serious drinking problem. On most days, he was drunk by 1 p.m.
Good for him. Whatever it takes, Buster.
Yeah, we're going to put up a picture of him young and then look at it old.
I know the difference between Wolfman and Spider Baby.
About 4,000 gallons of alcohol. So eventually he got dropped by Universal because of his drinking, and he eventually died July 12, 1973 in San Clemente. His body was donated to USC to try to figure out how do you cure lycanthropy. He had been married twice, and he had 2 sons. Their names, Ron Chaney.
Wow.
And Lon Chaney Jr. Jr.
Not the third?
No, Lon Chaney Jr. Jr.
Yeah, that's a normal child that's going to grow up.
So after the success of The Wolfman, Universal just started pumping out sequels to their older stuff rather than move forward with new characters, and it didn't take long for audiences to get tired of these sequels, and the legitimacy of these horror movies dwindled and got demoted to B-movie status. What was suggested as a joke by a writer so that he could get some money to buy a new car became reality when Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman came out in 1943 and started a tradition of crossover monster movies that became the first like shared universe in movies that's now the norm for all the superheroes superhero stuff today. The Universal monsters switched toward comedy for a little bit with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. That came out in 1948. That film was added to the National Film Registry in 2001. After World War II, gothic monsters didn't seem so scary now that nuclear bombs existed.
Yeah.
So going into the 50s, horror took the form of science gone wrong and malicious aliens coming to get you.
Yeah.
So Universal came back in a big way in this new form of the genre with Creature from the Black Lagoon in 1954. The Gill-Man became the unofficial sixth Universal monster. The Gill-Man was designed to look like an Academy Award with fins and a fish head.
Oh my God, was it really?
Yeah, and look at it. It makes sense.
It does.
He's very
Strange.
svelte. That's why I want him. I just want him.
Need it.
But the movie was filmed in Florida, so who cares?
It was also the first one that wasn't based on either a great novel or like a legend like the Wolfman was. Mythology, yeah.
No, Abbott and Costello weren't Greek gods or anything, were they?
They were Western heroes.
Like Wyatt Earp.
And Dr. Holiday.
So the Universal monster age officially came to an end with the third Gill-Man movie in 1956, The Creature Walks Among Us.
Tell me about that one.
He gets badly burned, so they do a surgery so that he can breathe on land, and he wears a suit. So I think it's best that these movies ended. The legacy of these monsters was kept going the next year, though, by the British Hammer Studios with The Curse of Frankenstein, which brought back serious monster movies and made stars of Peter Cushing, the guy who said "Fire when ready," and Christopher Lee, Saruman. Universal distributed all these movies in the U.S., but Universal itself's golden monster era was over. All the monsters were made into U.S. stamps. They were slaughtered and turned into U.S. stamps on October 30th, 1997. Vincent Price got his start in these old movies, as did Gloria Stewart, who went on to become the old lady in Titanic.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So these movies, they so defined what a Wolfman or a Dracula or a Frankenstein monster should look like, and they're just so ingrained in our culture that even if you've never seen these movies, you feel like you have. And they were all born out of the San Fernando Valley, mostly on the European street at Universal Studios.
It was just cobblestone. That's the only difference. It was Back to the Future, but then like, oh, throw cobblestones on that road. Let's get going.
But what if someone needs to skateboard on these? Give them a hoverboard.
Part 2.
So these movies, they look like LA.
Yeah.
And they're infused with such like an LA vibe. Even in The Wolfman, Larry Talbot says that he worked on the Mount Wilson telescope. Like there's all these LA references. So what was key to all these movies was that all the monsters had very human desires. Dracula wanted pleasure. The Phantom of the Opera wanted to be able to love a woman. Frankenstein wanted to be not hated. He wanted to be accepted. Yeah. Everybody had their thing. And they dealt with what like terror and monstrous behavior we all have inside of ourselves that we're all trying to repress, which I think is a very LA kind of concept.
Yeah.
And all this because Universal Studios favored genre over stars, and they made it so that a horror movie meant a monster movie. And Universal has always taken its horror very seriously, which is why their Halloween horror nights are always such a big deal. Yeah. One person even wrote that when the bats fly low and night is in the sky, Universal Studios are at their best. So now what's going on at Universal right now? Horror movie trends, they're described as being horror cycles. So the monster movies that we were just talking about were considered the Universal Gothic horror cycle. Right now we're sort of in the tail end, or we just left the zombie cycle. Yeah. So you can tell when a cycle's ending when parodies start showing up, like the Abbott and Costello movie marked the end for Universal, like Shaun of the Dead and stuff like that for zombies. But Universal is trying to make the next thing a whole new monster cycle. They did that, the Mummy reboot in the 90s, the Brendan Fraser one. They did Van Helsing in 2004, which was the first time since Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein that Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, and the Wolfman were all together. That was the first time. And then in 2010, they did the Wolfman remake. Right now, Dracula Untold just came out, and their plan is to create a Marvel-like universe for all of these monsters. They reshot the end of Dracula Untold to try to make it fit into this, but the official reboot is coming June 2016 with the remake of The Mummy. That's the official start of it. After that, they're going to do The Creature from the Black Lagoon, Frankenstein, and The Invisible Man.
And they're all going to fight the Monster Squad.
They're somehow going to destroy a major city. The guys in charge of this are the guys that made the Fast and Furious movies and Transformers. But they also, one of them also did Star Trek and The Amazing Spider-Man, so maybe. But I don't think so. The problem is that Dracula and Frankenstein are public domain now, so other people are trying to beat them to it, like the Frankenstein movies coming out in 2015 with Daniel Radcliffe, but we'll see.